The day my son brought home a girl from the city was the day my heart first whispered a warning I foolishly ignored. My name is Eleanor, and for 40 years, I've lived on this same plot of land where I raised my only son, Ethan. Our little farmhouse has withstood storms, droughts, and heartbreaks, but nothing prepared me for the hurricane named Vanessa. She arrived in designer boots that had clearly never touched soil, with a smile that sparkled like morning dew. I remember wiping my flour-covered hands on my apron, trying to make myself presentable. My son's eyes held a light I hadn't seen since he was a boy at Christmas. "Mom, this is Vanessa," he said, his voice carrying a pride that made my chest swell. "It's so lovely to meet you, Mrs. Wilson," she said, embracing me with a perfume-scented hug that seemed too practiced, too perfect. "Ethan has told me so much about you and this charming little place." Little place. The words stung like a paper cut, small but sharp. This farm had been enough for generations of Wilsons. But I smiled and opened my home to her because my son's happiness has always been my North Star. That first dinner, I served my famous chicken pot pie, the comfort food that had healed Ethan through every childhood disappointment. I noticed how Vanessa pushed the food around her plate, taking the smallest bites possible. "Oh, it's delicious," she insisted when caught, "but I'm watching my figure. City habits die hard, I guess." Later, as I was washing dishes, I overheard her whisper to Ethan on the porch, "It's quaint here. But don't worry, we won't have to visit too often." My hands froze mid-scrub. The soapy water suddenly felt cold against my skin. But surely I was overreacting? This city girl just needed time to adjust to country ways. I would be patient. I would be patient. I would be kind. But the tightness in her smile when Ethan suggested she learn my recipes, the way her eyes darted around our home as if cataloging all its shortcomings, these were just the first ripples of a flood that would eventually drown us all. I dried my weathered hands and looked out at them on the porch swing, my son and this stranger who held his heart. Something in my chest tightened like a knot. Something told me that the simple, peaceful life I'd known was about to change forever. Little did I know just how right that feeling would be. If this story feels familiar, please subscribe and hit that like button. Your support means everything, and trust me, what happens next will break your heart. 6 months later, I stood in the back of the Riverside Community Church, watching my only child marry a woman I barely knew. Vanessa was radiant in a dress that cost more than our tractor, while I wore the blue dress I'd sewn myself, feeling increasingly out of place in my son's new life. The reception was held at a fancy venue in the city, Vanessa's parents' choice. My modest contribution to the wedding fund seemed to disappear into the lavish arrangements that had nothing of our family traditions. No mason jars with wild flowers, no homemade pies, none of the simple beauty that had marked Wilson's celebrations for generations. When the time came for family photos, Vanessa's mother, with her salon-perfect hair and diamond earrings, pulled me aside. "Eleanor dear," she said with practiced sympathy, "perhaps you'd like to freshen up before the pictures? The lighting in here is so unforgiving." I excused myself to the bathroom where I stared at my reflection, the lines around my eyes deeper than I remembered, my hands rough from decades of honest work. For the first time in my life, I felt ashamed of these badges of my journey. The newlyweds moved into a sleek apartment downtown, a 30-minute drive that somehow felt like crossing into another world. I waited for invitations that rarely came, making excuses for my son's absence at Sunday dinners. "He's building his own life now," I told myself, packing away leftovers that once would have been Ethan's second helping. When I did visit their apartment, I brought homemade bread and jam, small pieces of home I hoped would remind Ethan of his roots. But Vanessa would accept them with that tight smile. "Thank you, Eleanor, but we're trying to cut carbs," she'd say, placing my offerings in some kitchen drawer I suspected rarely opened. I'd watch my son in his new environment, slightly too careful with his words, his laugh a bit more restrained than the belly laughs that used to echo through our farmhouse. He seemed like an actor playing the role of himself, and it broke my heart. One night, alone in the house that suddenly felt too big, I sat on Ethan's old bed, running my fingers over the quilt his grandmother had made. The silence was deafening. "Lord," I whispered to the empty room, "I'm not asking for much, just don't let me lose him completely." The tears came then, tears for the little boy who used to run to me with skinned knees and broken toys, believing I could fix anything. Tears for the man who now looked to someone else for guidance. Tears for the mother I was, suddenly unnecessary, suddenly obsolete. I never wanted to stand between my son and his happiness. I just wanted to remain part of that happiness. But as the months passed and the distance grew, I began to wonder if there was room for me at all in the life Vanessa was crafting for them. And the worst part, I was still trying to love her, still trying to understand her, still hoping she would eventually see me as family rather than competition. I had no idea that my simple kindness would become the very weapon she would use to push me further away. This story continues, and if you've ever felt replaced or forgotten by someone you love, hit that subscribe button and like this video. Your story matters too. The first real betrayal came on my birthday in April. For 30 years, Ethan and I had a tradition: blueberry pancakes at sunrise, just the two of us. Even through his college years, he'd make the drive home, arriving bleary-eyed but smiling, ready for our simple celebration. This year I waited in the kitchen from dawn, the batter ready, berries washed, the clock ticked past our usual time. 8 a.m., 9 a.m. By 10 I put the berries back in the refrigerator. When my phone finally rang near noon, I snatched it up with relief. "Mom, I'm so sorry." Ethan's voice sounded genuinely distressed. Vanessa planned a surprise business brunch with some potential clients. It completely slipped my mind that it was today. The familiar ache of disappointment settled in my chest, but I forced brightness into my voice. "Don't you worry about it, sweetheart. Business comes first. We'll make it up to you this weekend, I promise," he said quickly. Vanessa already mentioned a nice dinner, but that dinner never materialized. Instead, I received a gift basket 3 days later: store-bought cookies and mass-produced jam, with a card signed by both of them, though only in Ethan's handwriting. I told myself it wasn't important. They were busy building their lives. I couldn't expect the same traditions to continue forever. Then came Mother's Day. For weeks, I'd been dropping hints about the new community garden I was helping start, how I needed tools, how excited I was to grow vegetables for the local food pantry. It was my way of filling the empty hours, of still feeling useful. When Mother's Day arrived, Ethan and Vanessa came for the obligatory lunch. She brought a store-bought cake that sat untouched next to my homemade apple pie. Their gift was a spa certificate for a place downtown. "For a little self-care, Eleanor," Vanessa explained with that practiced smile. "You work too hard out here all alone." It was thoughtful, I suppose. If you didn't know me at all, I'd never had a professional manicure in my life, and had no desire to start now. "Thank you," I said, tucking the envelope away. "That's different." Later, as I was clearing dishes, I overheard them on the porch. "I told you she wouldn't appreciate it." Ethan sighed. "Well, I'm sorry your mother doesn't recognize quality when she sees it," Vanessa replied, her voice sharp. "I spent hours researching the best spa in town. My mother would have been thrilled. She was just hoping for those gardening tools she's been talking about," my son said softly. "Of course she was." Vanessa's laugh was like glass breaking. "More dirt and work. That's all she knows, Ethan. Don't you want better for her? For us?" There was a pause before my son responded, his voice so low I almost missed it. "Sometimes I don't know what I want anymore." My hands trembled as I scrubbed at a perfectly clean plate. The tears that threatened to fall weren't for the missed gift, they were for the realization that Vanessa wasn't just failing to understand me. She was actively rewriting me, reshaping my son's perception of his own mother. And Ethan, my fiercely loyal boy, was beginning to see me through her eyes, instead of his own. That night, after they left, I sat alone on the porch swing where I used to rock Ethan to sleep on summer evenings. The stars looked dimmer somehow, as if the very sky was acknowledging my pain. It was then I realized this wasn't just a daughter-in-law struggling to connect. This was something colder, something calculated, and I had absolutely no idea how to fight it. The garden tools arrived a week later, from Ethan alone. No note, no visit, just a delivery left on my porch like an apology he couldn't speak aloud. That was the moment I knew the woman my son married was slowly erasing me from his life, one misunderstanding at a time. If you've ever felt your love being twisted into something ugly by someone else's narrative, hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. What happened next still keeps me awake at night. Summer turned to fall, and the silence in my life grew louder with each passing day. The phone calls from Ethan became shorter, less frequent. Our Sunday dinners, once sacred family time, were now monthly obligations that Vanessa often found reasons to skip. "She's got a migraine," Ethan would explain, his eyes not quite meeting mine. "Work deadline," he'd say the next time, picking at my pot roast with distracted fingers. On the rare occasions she did join us, Vanessa brought her own world with her, constantly checking her phone, smiling at messages that were clearly more important than our conversation, making comments about upgrading my home that felt more like criticism than suggestions. "Have you considered painting these walls something less beige?" she asked once, running a manicured finger along my living room wall. "Gray is the new neutral. This looks so dated." These walls held 30 years of memories. Ethan's growth marks penciled near the kitchen door, the small dent where his first indoor baseball went astray, the slight discoloration where my late husband's favorite chair had stood for decades. Every imperfection told our story. "I like my walls just fine," I replied simply. She raised a perfectly shaped eyebrow. "Well, when you're ready to join this century, I know a wonderful interior designer." I caught Ethan's wince, the slight shaking of his head, not at his wife's rudeness, but at my perceived stubbornness. The kitchen had always been my domain, the heart of our home, where Ethan learned to make his grandmother's recipes, where neighbors gathered after church. Now Vanessa somehow commanded that space during her visits, rearranging my spices more efficiently, bringing fancy olive oils to replace my simple cooking staples. "Eleanor, you really should try this," she'd say, holding some exotic ingredient I couldn't pronounce. "It's so much healthier than what you're used to." What I was used to had nourished a family for generations. But I smiled and accepted her suggestions, because fighting would only push Ethan further away. The breaking point came during harvest season. For years I'd preserved summer's bounty, canning tomatoes, making jams, freezing corn. Ethan always helped, our hands working side by side in comfortable rhythm. This year I'd called twice to ask when he might come by to help. "We're just so busy, Mom," he'd said, distracted. "Maybe next weekend?" But next weekend never came. So I did it alone, my arthritic hands working twice as hard to make up for his absence. I still made his favorites: the blackberry jam he loved on Sunday mornings, the dilly beans he snacked on while watching football. When I delivered the carefully packed box to their apartment, Vanessa answered the door in workout clothes, clearly interrupted from something important. "Oh, Eleanor," she sighed, eyeing the box with thinly veiled dismay. "You didn't need to do all this. We shop at the organic market now." Ethan's cholesterol was concerning at his last checkup. My son appeared behind her, his expression caught between shame and longing, as he glimpsed the familiar jars. "Why don't you come in, Mom?" he offered, reaching for the box. "Actually, we're heading to spin class," Vanessa interjected smoothly. "But thank you for thinking of us." The door closed before I could respond. I stood there holding jars of memories no one wanted anymore, feeling like a relic from a past my son was being taught to outgrow. That night, I sat alone at my kitchen table and did something I hadn't done since my husband passed. I removed a place setting, first Ethan's father's place, now his. The table looked so empty with just one plate, one glass, one set of silverware. The silence in the house pressed against me like a physical weight. Even my prayers felt muffled, as if God too was growing distant. And what terrified me most wasn't losing my son to his new life. It was watching him lose himself, piece by quiet piece. Little did I know that what I feared most was already happening behind closed doors. If you're feeling that knot in your stomach, that ache of recognition, please subscribe and hit that like button. The darkness gets deeper before the light breaks through. Thanksgiving had always been sacred in our family, the one holiday where everyone came home, where we counted blessings and remembered those who had passed. I'd hosted it every year since I was first married, the recipes handed down through generations of Wilson women. That year, I spent days preparing, polishing my mother's silver, baking 3 different pies, because Ethan could never choose just one favorite, setting the table with the care of someone, creating an altar to family itself. When Ethan called the night before, I was elbow deep in bread dough for my famous rolls. "Mom," his voice had that hesitant quality I'd come to dread. "There's been a change of plans." My hands stilled in the dough. "What kind of change, sweetheart?" "Vanessa thinks we think it might be nice to host Thanksgiving this year at our place." The air left my lungs in a rush, but everything's already prepared here. "I know, Mom, and I'm sorry, but Vanessa's parents are flying in, and her sister too. Their apartment is bigger, and Vanessa wants to show off her new dining set." "I see." My voice sounded far away to my own ears. "You'll still come, right? Vanessa says you don't need to bring anything. She's got it all under control. Don't bring anything to Thanksgiving." the holiday I'd prepared for my entire adult life. Of course I'll come, I finally managed, my throat tight with unshed tears. The next day, I drove the 30 minutes to their apartment complex, a homemade pie hidden in the back seat. I couldn't bear to arrive empty-handed, despite the instructions. My hands shook slightly as I knocked on their door, hearing the buzz of conversation and laughter inside. Vanessa opened the door in a designer dress and full makeup, looking like she belonged in a magazine rather than a kitchen. Eleanor, happy Thanksgiving. Her embrace was quick, perfunctory. Her eyes caught the pie in my hands, and her smile tightened. Oh, you brought something. We actually have dessert covered, but that's thoughtful. Their apartment had been transformed, modern table settings, autumn decorations that looked straight from a department store display, nothing handmade or personal. Vanessa's parents greeted me with polite disinterest, her father immediately returning to watching football, her mother eyeing my simple dress with barely concealed judgment. Eleanor, why don't you sit here? Vanessa directed me to a spot at the far end of the table, away from Ethan, who was busy carving a store-bought turkey that lacked the golden crispness of a properly roasted bird. Throughout dinner, I was a spectator to my own holiday. Vanessa held court, telling stories about their life together, stories that painted Ethan as someone I barely recognized. According to her, he'd always hated country living, had been rescued from his provincial upbringing by her sophisticated influence. You should have seen him when we first met, she laughed, touching my son's arm possessively. He didn't know a Chardonnay from a Pinot Grigio, now he's practically a sommelier. Her mother nodded approvingly. It's amazing what the right woman can do for a man's refinement. I looked down at my plate, pushing around mashed potatoes that came from a box instead of the garden. Across the table, Ethan caught my eye for a moment, something like apology flashing across his face, before Vanessa recaptured his attention. When dessert time came, my pie remained untouched in the kitchen, while Vanessa presented a cheesecake from an expensive bakery. As everyone exclaimed over it, I slipped away to the bathroom, needing a moment alone. There, on the counter beside expensive hand soap, sat a framed photo of Ethan and Vanessa, but it wasn't just any photo. It was taken on my property, under the old oak tree where generations of my family had been photographed. The tree my husband had hung a swing from for our son, but I had been cropped out of the picture. I remembered that day clearly. I had stood beside them, my arm around my son. Now, only the edge of my sleeve remained, a ghost at the margin of their perfect image. I stared at my reflection in the mirror, a woman becoming invisible in her own family story. When I returned to the dining room, Vanessa was making an announcement, her voice bright with excitement. Since we're all together, we wanted to share some news, she said, gripping Ethan's hand. We've put in an offer on a house. It's in Lakeside Estates, you know, that gorgeous gated community, about an hour north of here. An hour north, in the opposite direction from my farm. My heart sank as Vanessa continued. It's perfect timing too, since we're planning to start a family soon. We need more space, better schools. Her eyes flicked to me, something triumphant in them. A fresh start. The message was clear. The future she planned had no place for worn farmhouses or aging mothers-in-law. She was removing my son, not just from my holiday table, but from my reach entirely. As her family applauded this news, Ethan looked at me, seeking approval, or maybe forgiveness. I forced a smile that felt like shattered glass on my lips. What could I say? That my heart was breaking? That the thought of grandchildren I would barely see was already a wound? That every mile between us felt like a victory for her? Instead, I raised my glass, along with everyone else, and pretended this slow erasure wasn't killing me inside. But what Vanessa did after dinner was crueler than anything I could have imagined. If this pain feels familiar, please subscribe and hit that like button. The darkest moment is still to come, and you won't believe what happened next. December arrived with bitter cold, and the promise of Christmas, the holiday that had always held the most magic in our family. Since Ethan was a boy, we'd had traditions: cutting our own tree from Willard's farm, stringing popcorn garlands by the fire, midnight service on Christmas Eve with hot chocolate after. When Ethan invited me to their holiday party, Vanessa's hosting for her work colleagues, I spent hours preparing. I chose a dress I'd saved for special occasions, baked my signature cranberry orange cookies that everyone always requested, even splurged on having my hair done in town. Their new house in Lakeside Estates was imposing, all stone and glass, nothing like the warm wood of our farmhouse. Inside it gleamed with decorations that looked professionally arranged, a towering tree draped with coordinating ornaments, rather than the mismatched treasures we'd collected over decades. Vanessa greeted me with air kisses, already distracted by other guests. Eleanor, you made it. Oh, you brought cookies. How quaint. You can put them in the kitchen with the catering. The house was filled with strangers in expensive clothes, everyone clutching wine glasses and laughing at jokes I couldn't hear. I placed my cookies beside elaborate appetizers, feeling foolish for bringing them. For an hour I wandered alone, smiling politely at people who barely noticed me. Ethan was constantly pulled away mid-conversation by Vanessa to meet someone important. Each time he left with an apologetic glance, promising to return. Finally, I found myself near a group that included Vanessa and her closest friends. I stood slightly apart, nursing a glass of water, when I heard my name. That's her. Ethan's mother, Vanessa was saying, her voice just loud enough to carry. Still lives on that dilapidated farm. We keep telling her to sell, but she's so attached to the past. A woman in a black dress made a sympathetic noise. It must be hard for you, dealing with such a traditional mother-in-law. Vanessa sighed dramatically. You have no idea. Everything is how we've always done it. The other day, she actually suggested we bring the baby to the farm after it's born, like we'd expose our child to all that rusticity. My heart stopped. Baby? What baby? I've tried to include her, but she makes everything so difficult, Vanessa continued. For Thanksgiving, she insisted on bringing her own pie when I'd ordered from Pierre's. It's like she's competing with me, trying to undermine me in my own home. That wasn't true. None of it was true. But the women around Vanessa nodded in understanding, their faces filled with pity, for her, not me. The hardest part, Vanessa lowered her voice conspiratorially, is watching Ethan try to balance between us. He feels so guilty about outgrowing that life. I keep telling him he doesn't need to feel responsible for her happiness. The room seemed to tilt beneath my feet. My son felt guilty for outgrowing me. Is that how he saw our relationship? As a burden of responsibility rather than love? Just then, Vanessa noticed me standing nearby. Rather than showing embarrassment at being overheard, a small satisfied smile crossed her lips. Eleanor, come join us. We were just talking about Christmas plans. The seamless transition, the innocent expression, it was masterful. If I confronted her now, I would appear to be the problem, the oversensitive mother-in-law, creating drama at a beautiful party. With all eyes on me, I managed a tight smile. Actually, I should be going. Early morning tomorrow. But you just got here, Vanessa protested, her concern perfectly performed. Ethan will be disappointed. Please tell him goodbye for me, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. As I turned to leave, Vanessa called after me, her voice carrying across the room. Are you sure you're okay to drive, Eleanor? You seem upset. Heads turned, conversations paused. In an instant I was transformed from invisible to spectacle, a fragile old woman, having some kind of episode at a sophisticated gathering. I fled to the foyer, fumbling for my coat, when Ethan finally appeared. Mom? What's wrong? Vanessa said you're not feeling well. I looked at my son, my beautiful boy whose eyes now held concern tinged with embarrassment. Behind him, Vanessa watched from the doorway, her expression one of practiced concern. Is there something you wanted to tell me? I asked quietly. About a baby? His eyes widened, then darted to Vanessa, who stepped forward smoothly. Oh, Ethan, I'm sorry, it just slipped out when I was talking to Madison. I thought we agreed to tell family after the first trimester. She placed a protective hand on her still flat stomach. We wanted to be sure everything was okay before making announcements. The calculated cruelty of it stole my breath. My first grandchild, the news every mother longs to hear, delivered as an overheard gossipy aside, at a party full of strangers. Congratulations, I managed, the word like ash in my mouth. That's wonderful news. We were going to tell you properly after Christmas, Ethan explained, looking torn. With everything going on, it's fine, I interrupted, unable to bear his excuses. I really do need to go. Outside in the bitter cold, I sat in my car until the tears subsided enough to drive. The Christmas lights blurred through my windshield as I made my way home, past decorated houses filled with families, past the future I was being systematically excluded from. That night, alone in my empty farmhouse, I finally allowed myself to break completely. I sobbed until there were no tears left, until my throat was raw and my heart felt hollowed out. In the morning, I would gather the pieces of myself and find strength again. But that night, I mourned, not just for myself, but for my son who couldn't see he was losing something precious, and for a grandchild who might never know the love that waited on this old farm. I had never felt more alone in my entire life. Yet somehow, I had no idea that the worst was still to come. If you've ever been made to feel small by someone who should have lifted you up, hit that subscribe button and like this video. The moment that broke me completely is just ahead. Christmas arrived with silence. For the first time in my son's life, we weren't together for the holiday. Vanessa had orchestrated a trip to Aspen with her family. A baby moon, she called it in the brief text Ethan sent announcing they wouldn't be home for Christmas. I sat alone by my tree, the presents I'd carefully chosen for them, still wrapped beneath it. Outside, snow blanketed the farm in pristine white that only emphasized the emptiness. No footprints marred its surface. No one was coming. January brought bitter winds, and a phone call that changed everything. "Mom," Ethan's voice sounded strained. "We need to talk about the farm." My heart clenched. "What about it, honey?" "With the baby coming, Vanessa and I have been discussing our future. This house in Lakeside Estates is a great investment, but city living is expensive. We're thinking long-term now." I waited, dreading what would come next. "The farm is just sitting there, Mom. All that land, the old house, it's worth a lot to developers. You could sell, get a nice little condo closer to us. It would be easier for you, especially as you get older." The suggestion struck me like a physical blow. Sell the farm, the land that had been in my husband's family for 4 generations, the home where I'd raised my child, buried my husband, planted every tree and flower with my own hands. "This is my home, Ethan," I said softly. "Your father is buried here." He sighed, and I could hear Vanessa's voice murmuring in the background. "I know, Mom, but Dad would want what's best for all of us. Think about it. You'd be closer to the baby. Isn't that what matters most?" The manipulation was so clear it made me dizzy. Using my future grandchild as leverage to get what they wanted. My land, my home, my inheritance transformed into their investment opportunity. "I need to think about it," I managed. "Of course," he replied, sounding relieved. "Take your time. We just want what's best for you." After hanging up, I walked through each room of my house, touching the walls that had sheltered so much love and grief. This wasn't just property, it was the physical embodiment of my life's story. The next morning, I drove to town for coffee with my oldest friend, Margaret. I needed someone else to hear what was happening, to tell me I wasn't crazy for feeling so wounded. Margaret listened, her lined face growing increasingly troubled as I recounted the past year, Vanessa's subtle manipulations, Ethan's growing distance, the final request to sell my home. "Eleanor," she said finally, reaching across the table to grasp my hand, "this isn't right. What she's doing, there's a word for it. Isolation, control. It's what people do when they want to separate someone from their support system." "But why?" I whispered, the question that had haunted me for months. Why would she want to cut me out of Ethan's life? "I've only tried to love them both." Margaret's eyes held a sadness that matched my own. "Some people can't share love, honey. They see it as competition. Every bit of affection Ethan has for you is affection she doesn't control." We sat in silence, the truth of it settling over me like a shroud. "What do I do, Margaret? I can't lose my son, and that baby, my grandchild." "You fight," she said simply, not with anger or accusations that would only drive Ethan further away. "You fight with truth and patience and love. The kind of love that outlasts schemes and manipulations." I drove home with Margaret's words echoing in my mind, a plan beginning to form. I wouldn't sell the farm. I wouldn't disappear quietly. I would stand firm in my truth and wait for my son to remember who I really was, who he really was. But Vanessa was already 2 steps ahead of me. The following Sunday, Ethan arrived alone, his face solemn. I'd prepared lunch, hoping to reconnect, to remind him of the bond we shared. "Mom," he began, not touching his food, "Vanessa and I have been talking. With the baby coming, we need to establish some boundaries." The word hung between us like a wall going up brick by brick. "What kind of boundaries, son?" He couldn't meet my eyes. "We think it's best if we limit visits for a while. The doctor says Vanessa's pregnancy is high risk, and stress isn't good for her or the baby." "And I'm stress?" The words felt like broken glass in my throat. "It's not that simple." He shifted uncomfortably. "It's just that whenever we discuss certain things, like the farm, or our future plans, you get upset, And then Vanessa gets upset seeing you upset. And her blood pressure, I understand. I interrupted, unable to bear the twisted logic. So how often will I see you? We thought maybe once a month for now, just until things settle down. Once a month? My son, who had grown in my body, who had never gone more than a week without seeing me his entire life, was now rationing his presence like a scarce resource. And the baby? I asked, my voice barely audible. Will I be allowed to see my grandchild? Something flickered across his face, doubt perhaps, or the first recognition of what he was doing. But it vanished quickly. Of course, Mom. Just on our terms. In ways that work for our new family. Their terms, their family. The exclusion was complete. After he left, I sat motionless at my kitchen table until darkness fell. The house creaked around me, as if sharing my grief. Outside, the winter wind howled, a sound so like crying that I couldn't distinguish it from my own tears. That night, I did something I hadn't done since Ethan was a newborn, and I was overwhelmed with the responsibility of keeping him alive. I called out to God in raw, desperate prayer. Help me, I whispered to the empty room. Help me find a way back to my son's heart. I couldn't know then that my prayer was already being answered, in ways more painful and more redemptive than I could possibly imagine. If you've ever prayed in the darkness, believing no one was listening, hit that subscribe button, and like this video. The answer to my prayer came from the most unexpected place. February brought ice storms and a strange phone call. I was checking my chicken coop, making sure my hens had enough warmth in the bitter weather, when my cell phone rang, a number I didn't recognize. Mrs. Wilson? A woman's voice, vaguely familiar. This is Diane Roberts. We met at Ethan and Vanessa's holiday party. I vaguely recalled her, one of Vanessa's friends who had listened to her complaints about me. I know this is unusual, she continued, hesitation in her voice, but I wondered if we could meet for coffee. There's something I think you should know. Curiosity overcame my initial wariness. We arranged to meet at a cafe halfway between our homes, a place where Vanessa and Ethan would be unlikely to see us. Diane was younger than me by 20 years but had kind eyes that held something like remorse. As we sat across from each other, steam rising from our mugs. I've been friends with Vanessa since college, she began, her fingers nervously turning her cup. She's always been ambitious, determined to have the perfect life, the perfect husband, the perfect story. I waited, unsure where this was leading. At the Christmas party after you left, Vanessa was different, triumphant, almost. She made a comment that bothered me, that she'd finally solved the mother-in-law problem. Like it was a game she'd won. My stomach tightened. Why are you telling me this? Diane looked down. Because I saw my own mother-in-law's face in yours that night. The hurt, the confusion. My husband's mother died last year, and we weren't speaking because of things I misunderstood. Things I can never make right now. She took a deep breath. The thing is, Mrs. Wilson, Vanessa lies. Not little white lies, strategic ones. She creates narratives that serve her purposes. What kind of narratives? I asked, though part of me already knew. She's told Ethan things about you. Conversations you supposedly had, criticism you allegedly made about their life choices. She showed us text messages from you. Text messages? I interrupted. I barely know how to text. I certainly never sent anything unkind. Diane nodded. That's why I'm here. I saw her do it once. Delete her messages to you, edit your responses, then show Ethan a conversation that never happened. He was so upset. The room seemed to spin around me. All those times Ethan had been distant, hurt, withdrawn, had he been reacting to words I'd never said? Why would she do this? I whispered, though the answer was becoming clearer with every revelation. Control, Diane said simply. Vanessa needs to be the center of Ethan's world. She can't share him, not with friends, not with family, especially not with a mother he clearly adores. I thought of all the canceled visits, the misunderstandings, the gradual isolation. Each incident now appeared as a deliberate step in a calculated plan. There's something else, Diane continued, her voice lower. Something about the pregnancy. My heart stumbled. Is the baby okay? The baby is fine. It's just the timing. Vanessa always swore she'd never have children. Then suddenly, right when Ethan was starting to question some things, to spend more time with you again, she announced she was pregnant. The implication hung in the air between us. Are you suggesting? Diane shook her head quickly. I'm not saying it wasn't planned. I'm saying the timing was convenient. And I've never seen anyone use a pregnancy so effectively to get what they want. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of these revelations pressing down on me like stone. What am I supposed to do with this information? I finally asked. If I confront her, she'll deny everything. If I tell Ethan, he'll think I'm trying to come between them and their child. Diane reached across the table and squeezed my hand, a gesture of surprising compassion from this stranger. I don't know, Mrs. Wilson, but I believe in truth, and I think Ethan deserves to know who he really married. After Diane left, I sat alone, turning my cold coffee between my palms. Outside, rain had begun to fall, freezing on contact with the frigid ground, beautiful and treacherous, much like the truths I'd just learned. I thought of my son, caught in an invisible web of manipulation, of my grandchild, being used as a pawn before they were even born, of the years stretching ahead, filled with more lies, more distance, more carefully orchestrated exclusion. For the first time since this all began, something beyond grief stirred in my heart, something like righteous anger, not just for myself, but for Ethan, the boy I'd raised to be honest and true, now living in a house built on deception. As I drove home on roads slick with ice, a plan began to form. I wouldn't confront Vanessa directly, that would only play into her hands. I wouldn't overwhelm Ethan with accusations he wasn't ready to hear. Instead, I would wait. I would watch. I would document everything, every text, every call, every visit and cancellation, and I would pray for one thing, a moment of clarity for my son, a chance for the truth to break through. It came sooner than I expected. That weekend, Ethan arrived alone for our now monthly visit. He looked tired, the strain of living between worlds evident in the shadows beneath his eyes. Vanessa's at a baby shower, he explained, settling into his old place at the kitchen table. I set a mug of coffee before him, strong and black, the way he'd always liked it before Vanessa introduced him to lattes and macchiatos. How are you really doing, son? I asked, keeping my voice gentle, free of accusation. He stared into his coffee as if seeking answers there. Busy. Work is crazy. The nursery renovations are taking forever. And you? Not the house, not the job. You? Something in my question broke through his practiced responses. His shoulders sagged, the facade crumbling. I don't know, Mom, he admitted, his voice small like when he was a child confessing a mistake. Everything's moving so fast. Sometimes I feel like I'm living someone else's life. I resisted the urge to flood him with everything I'd learned. Instead, I simply listened. Vanessa has all these plans, private preschools we need to get on waiting lists for, investment accounts for college, a bigger house in a few years. Everyone at her firm expects certain things, lives a certain way. And what do you want? I asked. He looked up, surprise flickering across his face, as if no one had asked him that question in a very long time. I want, he began, then stopped, struggling to find words for desires long suppressed. I want things to be simpler. I want to sleep through the night without worrying about mortgages and private schools and social expectations. You can have that, Ethan. He shook his head. Not anymore. We're having a baby. I have responsibilities now. Responsibilities, yes, but not this performance you're describing. His phone buzzed, Vanessa no doubt, checking on him. He glanced at it, a shadow crossing his face. I should go. As he stood to leave, I took a chance. Ethan, do you remember what your father used to say about living truthfully? His hand paused on the doorknob. A life built on lies is like a house built on sand, he recited softly. The tide always comes. The tide always comes. I repeated. Whatever's true will eventually be revealed. Something shifted in his expression. A flicker of the son I knew, the man who valued honesty above all else. For just a moment, doubt clouded his eyes, and in that doubt, I saw the first crack in Vanessa's carefully constructed reality. I watched him drive away, hope blooming cautiously in my heart. The truth had taken root, a small seed, but planted in fertile ground. All it needed now was time to grow. What I didn't know was that the final revelation would come from a source none of us could have predicted. If you believe in the power of truth to overcome deception, hit that subscribe button and like this video. The moment that changed everything is just around the corner. March arrived with the first hesitant signs of spring, crocuses pushing through the last patches of snow, birdsong returning to the dawn chorus. I found myself in the garden earlier than usual, turning the soil, preparing for new life. It felt symbolic somehow, this act of faith that something beautiful would grow from the dark earth. I was kneeling beside my rose bushes, pruning away winter damage, when a car I didn't recognize pulled into my driveway. A woman emerged, elegant, silver-haired, with a bearing that spoke of confidence and purpose. "Eleanor Wilson," she called, walking toward me. "I'm Rebecca Gardner, Vanessa's former mother-in-law." I stood slowly, brushing dirt from my knees. "Former mother-in-law." Eleanor's smile held no warmth. "Yes, before your son, there was my son David." Their marriage lasted exactly 18 months, just long enough for Vanessa to secure a very generous divorce settlement. We moved inside, where I poured coffee with hands that trembled slightly. Eleanor declined sugar or cream, her posture perfect even on my worn kitchen chair. "I've been following Vanessa's life from a distance," she explained. "Not out of spite, but concern. When I saw the announcement of her pregnancy in the society pages, I felt compelled to reach out to you." "Why?" I asked, though a chill of premonition was already crawling up my spine. Eleanor set down her cup with precision. "Because I recognize the pattern. Isolation, alienation from family, convenient health concerns that require expensive solutions." Her eyes met mine. "Has she suggested selling your property yet?" The question struck like a physical blow. "How did you know?" "Because she did the exact same thing to David's grandmother, a lovely woman who owned waterfront property Vanessa coveted. She drove a wedge between them, then convinced David the poor woman was becoming unstable living alone. They sold the property for development. 3 months later, Vanessa filed for divorce. My kitchen, always a place of comfort, suddenly felt cold and foreign. If this is true, why didn't your son warn mine? Why didn't anyone say something?" "The settlement included a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement," Eleanor replied crisply. "David can't speak about their marriage without facing financial penalties. But I signed nothing." She leaned forward. "And I couldn't bear to see another family destroyed by her ambitions." "Does she truly care for my son at all?" I asked, the question that had haunted me for months. Eleanor's expression softened. "I believe Vanessa cares for people as much as she's capable of caring for anyone beyond herself. Your son is handsome, successful, kind, a perfect supporting actor in the story she's writing. As long as he plays his part, she'll be a perfectly adequate wife. And if he doesn't, then she'll rewrite the story without him." Eleanor reached into her handbag and removed a manila envelope. "These are copies of documents I've collected, financial records, text messages David managed to save, witness statements from friends. There's a pattern here that's impossible to ignore once you see it." I stared at the envelope, understanding that its contents could either save my son or destroy what remained of our relationship. "What am I supposed to do with this?" Eleanor stood, smoothing her immaculate skirt. "That's for you to decide. But if I may offer one piece of advice from someone who's walked this path, the truth always comes at a cost. The question is whether the price of silence is higher." After she left, I sat at my kitchen table for hours, the unopened envelope before me like Pandora's box. Outside, rain began to fall, gentle spring rain that nourished the sleeping seeds in my garden. Finally, I opened it. What I found inside confirmed my worst fears and revealed new ones I hadn't imagined. Financial manipulations, systematic alienation, a pattern of targeting men with assets or potential, then isolating them from anyone who might question her influence. Most disturbing were the similarities, phrases, tactics, even specific lies, that echoed what I'd experienced with painful familiarity. As darkness fell, I made a decision. I wouldn't confront Vanessa. That would only drive Ethan further into her protection. I wouldn't overwhelm my son with documents and accusations when he was preparing to become a father. Instead, I would wait for the right moment, the moment when he was ready to see the truth for himself. That moment came the very next day. Ethan arrived unannounced, his face pale, his movements agitated. He paced my living room like a caged animal. "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need the absolute truth." "Always, son." He stopped pacing, his eyes finally meeting mine. "Did you tell Vanessa you thought she was faking her pregnancy complications for attention?" The accusation was so absurd, so completely fabricated, that I could only stare in shock. "Did you suggest that we should name the baby after Dad even though we've told you we're naming him after Vanessa's grandfather?" He continued, his voice rising. "Did you tell her that you'd be a better mother to this child than she could ever be?" "Ethan," I said calmly, "you know I would never say any of those things." "Then why is Vanessa in tears? Why does she have text messages from you saying exactly that?" This was the moment, the crossroads I'd been dreading and hoping for. I took a deep breath. Son, sit down, please. Reluctantly, he perched on the edge of the sofa, his body tense as a bowstring. I have never sent Vanessa any texts like that. I barely know how to text at all. You know this. I kept my voice even gentle, but I'm not surprised she has messages that appear to be from me. His brow furrowed. What are you saying? I'm saying that someone has been creating conversations that never happened, manipulating situations, deliberately driving us apart. His immediate instinct was to defend her. I could see it in his face. But something held him back, perhaps the lifetime of truth between us, perhaps the seed of doubt already planted. That's a serious accusation, Mom. I know it is, and I wouldn't make it without proof. I rose and retrieved Eleanor's envelope from the kitchen, placed it on the coffee table between us. Didn't open it. This contains information about Vanessa's past, her previous marriage, her patterns, documentation of things she's done before. I'm not asking you to look at it now. I'm not asking you to believe it without question. I'm just asking you to consider that you might not have the full story. Ethan stared at the envelope as if it might bite him. Where did you get this? From someone who cares about preventing history from repeating itself. He stood abruptly. This is crazy. Vanessa wouldn't. She loves me. We're having a child together. I know you believe that, and I hope it's true. I stepped closer, placing my hand on his arm. But Ethan, think about this past year. Think about how many misunderstandings there have been. How many times my words have somehow been twisted. How many plans have changed at the last minute. How many people from your past are no longer in your life. Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or the first honest examination of patterns he'd been ignoring. Just pay attention, I said softly. That's all I'm asking. Pay attention to what's really happening, not what you're told is happening. He left without taking the envelope, his face troubled, his goodbye distracted. I watched him drive away with the weight of truth heavy on my heart. I had planted the seed. Whether it would grow or be crushed depended on forces beyond my control. 3 days passed with no word. I tended my garden, fed my chickens, and prayed more fervently than I had in years. On the 4th day, my phone rang. Mom, Ethan's voice sounded strange, hollow yet somehow more present than it had in months. I need to see you. There's something you should know. Of course, son, anytime. No, he said firmly. Not at the farm, not at my house either. Somewhere public. The diner off Highway 16 maybe? Tomorrow at noon? The strange specificity, the caution in his tone. Something had changed. I'll be there, I promised. What I didn't know then was that my son had already begun his own investigation, one that would crack the foundation of the life Vanessa had so carefully constructed. If you've ever been vindicated after being disbelieved for so long, hit that subscribe button and like this video. The moment of truth is finally here, and it's more explosive than I could have imagined. The diner was nearly empty when I arrived. Just a few truckers at the counter, and an elderly couple in a corner booth. I chose a table near the back, where we could speak privately, and waited. My hands couldn't seem to stay still, smoothing my skirt, rearranging the silverware, betraying the anxiety that fluttered beneath my ribs. Ethan arrived precisely at noon, sliding into the seat across from me. The changes in him were subtle but profound, a new wariness in his eyes, shadows beneath them, suggesting sleepless nights. Gone was the polished city veneer Vanessa had cultivated. My son looked rumpled, tired, and somehow more himself than he had in months. Thanks for coming, Mom, he said, his voice low. Of course. What's happening, Ethan? He ordered coffee for us both before answering, waiting until the waitress had moved away. After I left your house the other day, I couldn't stop thinking about what you said, about paying attention. His fingers drummed nervously on the table. So I did. And my heart hammered against my ribs. I installed security cameras in our house. The admission came out in a rush, without telling Vanessa, just small ones, in the common areas. He looked down, shame coloring his face. I never thought I'd be the kind of man who would spy on his wife. But something didn't feel right. What did you find? I asked gently. The first day, nothing unusual. The second day, he swallowed hard. I came home early from work. Told her I had a meeting across town. Instead, I sat in my car, and watched the footage on my phone. His hands curled into fists on the table. She had someone over. A man. They were intimate. On our couch. In the home where we're supposed to be raising our child. My heart broke for him. The betrayal. The humiliation. But his expression told me there was more. After he left, she made a phone call. I couldn't hear everything, but she was laughing about me. About how I believed everything she told me. About how once the baby came, she'd finally convince me to deal with the farm situation. I reached across the table, covering his clenched fist with my hand. "Oh, Ethan, there's more," he continued, his voice hardening. "I started looking into our finances, found accounts I didn't know about, money missing. A consultation with a divorce attorney from 6 months ago, when she was already pregnant." The waitress returned with our coffee. We sat in silence until she moved away. "I confronted her last night," Ethan finally said, stirring his coffee absently. "Showed her the footage, asked about the accounts." A chill ran through me. How did she react? At first, denial, then tears. How could I invade her privacy? How could I not trust her? A bitter smile twisted his lips. When that didn't work, she switched tactics, said it was a one-time mistake, said the stress of the pregnancy, my emotional unavailability, my unhealthy attachment to you, all driven her to it. I remained silent, letting him process the painful truth in his own way. When I mentioned the financial discrepancies, she got cold, calculating. Said if I pursued it, she'd take me for everything in the divorce. Said no judge would side against a pregnant woman. "What are you going to do?" I asked the question that mattered most. Ethan looked up, and for the first time, I saw clarity in his eyes. Painful but necessary clarity. "I've contacted a lawyer, a good one. I've documented everything. The affair, the financial manipulation, the lies." He took a deep breath. "And I've spoken to David Gardner." The name hit me like a physical shock. Her ex-husband. Ethan nodded. "After I found the footage, I went back to your house, took that envelope, read everything." His expression was grim. "Then I called him, paid the penalty for breaking the NDA myself. Got the whole story, how she isolated him from his family, pushed his grandmother to sell property, then filed for divorce once the money was secured." "Oh, Ethan," I whispered, my heart breaking for his pain, even as relief flooded through me. "I'm so sorry." "Don't be sorry, Mom." His hand turned beneath mine, gripping my fingers. "Be angry."
I am.
"She's been systematically destroying our relationship for over a year, making me doubt myself, doubt you, the person who has never lied to me a day in my life." For a moment we sat in silence, the weight of revelation hanging between us. Then unexpectedly Ethan smiled, a small sad smile, but genuine. "You know what the worst part is? I would have forgiven almost anything. The affair, even the financial deception. But what she did to us, to you and me, that's unforgivable." "What happens now?" I asked. "Now." He straightened his shoulders, a determination in his bearing that reminded me so much of his father. "Now I take back my life. I've frozen our joint accounts, changed the locks on the house. My lawyer is filing papers tomorrow. And the baby?" I couldn't help asking. A shadow crossed his face. "I've insisted on a paternity test, given everything else she's lied about." He couldn't finish the sentence. We talked for another hour. Plans, legalities, the long road of healing ahead. When we finally rose to leave, Ethan embraced me tightly, like he used to as a child after a nightmare. "I'm so sorry I didn't see it," he murmured against my hair. "So sorry I doubted you." "You see it now," I replied simply. "That's what matters." As we walked to our cars, Ethan paused, looking out across the sprawling fields that surrounded the diner, fields not unlike those on our farm. "Mom, would it be okay if I came home for a while, just until I figure things out?" Home. The word hung in the air between us, beautiful in its simplicity, its truth. "Your room is exactly as you left it," I said, joy warming my voice, despite the circumstances. "It's always been waiting for you." He nodded, eyes bright with unshed tears. "I'll come by tomorrow, after the lawyer, bring some things." We parted ways in the parking lot, my son, heading back to confront the ruins of the life he'd thought he was building. Me returning to the farm, that had always been our true foundation. As I drove home, spring sunshine broke through the clouds, illuminating the familiar landscape with golden light. For the first time in over a year, I felt the weight lifting from my shoulders, the knot in my chest, loosening its grip. The truth had finally come to light. The long winter of deception was ending. What I couldn't know then was that Vanessa had one final desperate card to play. If you believe justice eventually finds its way to light, hit that subscribe button and like this video. The last twist in this story will show you just how far some people will go when they're finally exposed. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect spring day that promises renewal. I was in the kitchen baking bread, something I hadn't felt like doing in months, when my phone rang. Ethan's number. Mom. His voice was tight, controlled in a way that immediately set off alarm bells. Vanessa's at your farm. The bread dough forgotten. I moved to the window. Sure enough, an unfamiliar luxury SUV was coming up my long driveway, dust billowing behind it. She followed me to the lawyer's office. Ethan continued, his words rushing together.
Caused a scene.
When I left, she must have. I don't know how she knew I was planning to stay with you. I'm 10 minutes away. Don't engage with her, Mom. She's not stable right now. It's all right, son, I said, watching the vehicle stop haphazardly beside my porch. I'll be fine. I hung up as Vanessa emerged from the car. Not the perfectly coiffed society wife I was used to seeing, but a woman undone. Her designer clothes were wrinkled, her hair pulled back carelessly, her face blotchy from crying, or rage, or both. Taking a deep breath, I stepped onto the porch to meet her. Whatever was coming, I would face it with dignity. Where is he? She demanded, storming toward me. I know he's been here. I know you've poisoned him against me. Ethan isn't here, Vanessa, I replied calmly. And the only poison in his life has been the lies you've been feeding him. She laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. Oh, that's rich. The martyr act. Poor Eleanor, the perfect mother-in-law who just wants everyone to be happy. What I want, I said, keeping my voice steady, is for my son to live an honest life with people who truly love him. Love. She spat the word like venom. You think your backward, simple kind of love is enough in this world? I was giving him everything. Connections, status, a future. What can you offer him besides this? She gestured wildly at the farm. This dying way of life. Truth, I said simply. Acceptance. A home where he doesn't have to perform or pretend. Something flickered across her face. Not remorse. Exactly. But perhaps the first recognition that she had lost something genuine in pursuit of her machinations. He'll come back to me, she insisted, though uncertainty had crept into her voice. Once the baby comes, men always do. If it's his child, I replied quietly. Her eyes widened fractionally, just enough to confirm what Ethan had suspected. The baby, like everything else, had been a calculation. You have no idea what you've done, she hissed, stepping closer. I had plans. Important plans. This property, Ethan's position at the firm, our social standing, it was all coming together perfectly until you interfered. I didn't interfere, Vanessa. I merely existed. Loved my son. That was enough to threaten you. Her composure cracked completely then. You think you've won? You haven't won anything, old woman. I'll destroy him before I let him crawl back to this nothing life with you. I'll ruin his reputation, his career. I'll make sure he never. That's enough, Vanessa. We both turned to see Ethan standing at the edge of the porch, his face pale but resolved. Behind him, a police car pulled into the driveway, lights flashing silently. The officers are here to serve you with a temporary restraining order, he said, his voice steady, and to escort you off this property. For a moment, Vanessa seemed genuinely shocked, as if the consequences of her actions were an entirely unexpected development. You can't be serious, she whispered. After everything I've done for you? After the life I've given you? The life you constructed, you mean, Ethan corrected her, based on lies and manipulation. It ends now, Vanessa. Two officers approached, their expressions professionally neutral. One held paperwork. Mrs. Wilson? He addressed Vanessa. I'm Officer Bennett. I need you to step away from the residence and speak with us, please. Something in Vanessa seemed to collapse then, the careful facade of the wronged wife giving way to cold calculation. This isn't over, she said, looking between us, not by a long shot. As the officers led her toward their vehicle, explaining the terms of the restraining order, Ethan came to stand beside me on the porch. We watched in silence as Vanessa was escorted to her car, followed by the patrol vehicle as she drove away. Are you okay? Ethan asked quietly. I'm fine, I assured him. Are you? He sighed deeply, the sound of a man finally setting down an immense burden. I will be. It's going to be messy. The divorce, the publicity, the firm finding out, everything. But you'll be free, I said. Yes. He looked out over the farm, the fields greening with spring promise, the old oak tree that had sheltered generations of our family. Free to remember who I really am. That night, Ethan slept in his childhood room while I made a simple dinner of comfort foods he'd loved growing up. We talked for hours, really talked, for the first time in over a year, about his father, about the future, about healing. As the weeks passed, the full extent of Vanessa's deception came to light. The paternity test confirmed what we'd feared: the child wasn't Ethan's. Financial investigations revealed systematic fraud. Former friends came forward with similar stories of manipulation and lies. Vanessa's carefully constructed world collapsed like a house of cards. The divorce was finalized with surprising speed, given the circumstances. She left town shortly after, to reinvent herself elsewhere, no doubt to find another life to infiltrate. But the damage she'd done wouldn't disappear so easily. Ethan struggled with trust, with shame, with grief for the life he'd thought he was building. There were dark days when he questioned every decision, every relationship. Through it all, I tried to be the one constant he could rely on, not pushing, not saying "I told you so," simply being present as he rebuilt himself from the ground up. Slowly, like tender shoots after a harsh winter, he began to thrive again. He moved back to town, taking a position at a smaller law firm where the hours were reasonable and the values aligned with his own. He reconnected with old friends, rediscovered abandoned hobbies, and every Sunday without fail, he came home to the farm for dinner, sometimes bringing friends, sometimes coming alone, but always returning to the truth of who he was and where he came from. One evening in late summer, we sat on the porch swing watching fireflies rise from the fields. The air was sweet with the scent of fresh-cut hay, and somewhere in the distance, a whippoorwill called. "I keep thinking about forgiveness," Ethan said suddenly. "Whether I should try to forgive her." I considered this carefully before answering. Forgiveness isn't about the other person deserving it. It's about refusing to carry the weight of bitterness yourself. He nodded slowly. "Is that why you've never spoken against her, even after everything she did to you? To us?" "Partly," I admitted, "but mostly because hating Vanessa wouldn't undo what happened. It would only distract from the healing we need to do." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. "I think I understand now why Dad always said you were the strongest person he knew. It wasn't just about working the farm or raising me alone after he died. It was this capacity to face darkness without becoming dark yourself." Tears pricked at my eyes, not from sadness, but from the profound relief of being truly seen again, of having my son back, not just physically, but spiritually. "Some lessons can only be learned through pain," I said softly. "The trick is making sure the pain teaches you the right things." As darkness fell completely, we sat in comfortable silence, the porch swing creaking gently beneath us. The stars emerged one by one, eternal and unchanging above our small human dramas. Whatever came next, we would face it together, mother and son, bound not by obligation but by choice, by truth, by love that had weathered the storm and emerged stronger. And in that moment, despite everything we'd lost, everything we'd suffered, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel again. Profoundly, completely blessed. If you've found your way back to truth after deception, hit that subscribe button and like this video. Our final chapter holds the wisdom earned through this painful journey. 2 years have passed since that spring of revelations and reconciliations. The farm continues its ancient cycles: planting and harvest, dormancy and renewal. And in those cycles, I've found the deepest truths about love, forgiveness, and what it means to be family. Ethan has blossomed in ways I couldn't have imagined during those dark days. He's found purpose in his new legal practice, specializing in helping victims of fraud and manipulation. The wounds Vanessa inflicted have become a source of empathy and understanding for others walking similar paths. We never heard directly from Vanessa again, though occasionally news filters back through mutual acquaintances. She remarried quickly, a wealthy older man in another state. I pray she's found whatever was missing in her that drove her to such calculated cruelty. I pray even more for those in her orbit, that they might see clearly what we didn't see until it was almost too late. Last Christmas, our second since everything changed, Ethan brought someone to dinner. Sarah, a kindergarten teacher with kind eyes and an easy laugh. I watched them together, noting the comfort, the lack of performance, the genuine joy they found in each other's company. "She's nothing like Vanessa," Ethan told me later, helping with the dishes, and yet I was afraid to trust again. "What changed?" I asked. He smiled, passing me a plate to dry. I remembered what you taught me about love. That real love expands your world rather than shrinking it, that it brings people together instead of driving them apart. I've thought often about that definition in the months since, about how the right kind of love is like good soil. It nourishes growth rather than controlling it, supports rather than confines. Vanessa's version of love was all about possession, performance, and power. It dazzled briefly, but couldn't sustain life. It was a counterfeit so convincing that my intelligent, compassionate son couldn't distinguish it from the genuine article until the damage was nearly irreparable. This is what I wish to share with you. From my heart to yours. True love never requires you to sever connections with those who genuinely care for you. True love doesn't demand performance or perfection. True love doesn't whisper poison in your ear about those who have stood by you through every storm. If someone's love makes your world smaller, more isolated, more dependent on their approval, that isn't love. It's control wearing love's clothing. I look back now on those painful months of separation from my son with a wisdom born of suffering. Would I erase that time if I could? Surprisingly, no. For it taught us both what we value, what we will defend, and what we will never again take for granted. The unbreakable bond between us, forged in truth and tested by fire. Every Sunday Ethan still comes home for dinner. Sometimes Sarah joins him, sometimes his old friends from town. Our table, once nearly empty, is now often surrounded by laughter and conversation, a community rebuilt on honest foundations. And that, perhaps, is the greatest lesson in all of this. What Vanessa tried to destroy has instead been strengthened. What she tried to erase has been written more deeply into the story of our lives. Time, truth, and love. These are the forces that ultimately prevail. Not because they are louder or more cunning than deception, but because they are more patient, more enduring, more real. If you're walking through a season of manipulation or alienation from someone you love, know this truth has a way of rising to the surface. Keep your heart open, keep your dignity intact, keep believing that authentic love will eventually be recognized for what it is. And remember that sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is simply wait, steadfast and loving, while truth does its quiet, unstoppable work. Have you ever experienced someone trying to come between you and a loved one? Have you witnessed the power of truth to heal what deception has broken? Share your story in the comments below, and remember that by speaking your truth, you may be the light someone else needs to find their way home. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel and hit that like button. Your support helps us continue sharing stories of hope, healing, and the triumph of genuine love over manipulation and control. And remember, in a world where performance and pretense often masquerade as connection, choose authentic relationships every time. They may not be perfect or polished, but they will sustain you through life's darkest storms. Thank you for walking this path with me.